Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is my Sunday morning chat video, although by the time I post it it'll probably be Sunday afternoon. So be it. Yesterday's garden party, the Wessex Orchid Society, big success, and thanks to Alan and Sue for making it so. We had a dull day, and towards the end it did come on to, you know, light drizzly rain, that sort of rain that you think, oh, it's not too bad, so I don't mind standing in it, and then 10 minutes later you're soaking wet, you know what I mean. But thanks to various sort of gazebos and tent arrangements, everybody was under cover and not all squashed up. It worked really well, and the food was exceptional. I've discovered a new type of thing to put in sandwiches that I'd never heard of before that was absolutely delicious. Yes, I mean, now I should be getting my food ready to take to the Bournemouth Orchid Society garden party, but that's cancelled, and that's probably a reasonable decision, basically, because it's just going to be a miserable dull day, and it does take the edge off outdoor events if it's miserable. So they won't rearrange that now, because this was a rearranged date from 2 weeks ago. So it's a shame with things like that, when you get so much prolonged hot dry weather, almost 3 months worth, and the 2 weekends where I've got outdoor events to go to both were wet. Still, that's life. I did a video which I've already posted of Alan's greenhouse and his plants. The one thing I did notice, that despite having an awful lot more plants than me, there's a hell of a lot of specimen plants in there, many of which I've seen at shows many times. You know, there's a lot of his plants I instantly recognise. They're like old friends when you meet up with them, and it's quite nice to see them where they're grown rather than just set up in a show for display. So that was good. And I did notice that despite that vast number of plants, there's so little in bloom. And in amongst, you know, the orchid growers at the society, that was quite a high topic of conversation, was what a difficult year it's been. I mean, there's quite a few of the Wessex growers are cool growers, you know, down in the Masdevallia Dracula sort of arena. And, you know, they've had real troubles, lots of burnt leaf tips and difficulty keeping up with watering, and plants just suffering in the heat. Nobody was admitting to huge plant losses, but plant damage, you know, especially one guy who grows mainly Masdevallias and so many show quality plants in amongst the collection that have now had the edge taken off of them because they've got some damage to the leaves. You know, it's quite sad for somebody who works hard at, you know, getting good quality plants to show conditions, and then the weather just spoils it, you know. But, you know, there'll be other years, and we'll have other things to complain about, I'm sure. But, yeah, I think I noticed about 5 plants in bloom in Alan's collection. There was a lovely little species, Phalaenopsis, beautiful but tiny blooms, but small but perfectly formed, I would say. A few others dotted around, but very thin on the ground. So when I got home yesterday, I had a quick look out here, and I was pleased on the grounds that you can see there's some splashes of colour. And although it's not a huge number, you know, it's not bad for the number of plants I've got. But the main topic of conversation was what on earth are we going to do for our show towards the end of September? Because most people were saying that things have just bloomed at odd times, or the blooms just haven't lasted anywhere near the length of time they were expecting. So making plans for a show is difficult, and lots of people are going to be thin on the ground, and that may make for a poor show. The Wessex show is in October, a few weeks later, and those few weeks may make all the difference, who knows. But that's the game with orchids. They bloom when they're good and ready. It's difficult to try and induce them to bloom, or even force them, damn near impossible. Orchids seem to please their flipping selves. I've got a lazy day today. I need to water my mounts, although I could get away with just spraying them today. It's going to be a dull day. There'll be no heat out here. I'm currently at less than 20 degrees. I was talking to one grower who has a highly automated, massive greenhouse. I think it's something like 20 metres by 8 metres. It's vast. Huge number of plants and the biggest dendrobium collection you could ever hope to see. I was talking to him about how he's managed, and he couldn't sing the praises high enough of the aluminium shade netting. He said over the years, you know, when you get a hot spell, you know, with burning sunshine down on your greenhouse, trying to keep things cool is just difficult. And since he got that aluminium shade netting, which he's a bit of a do-it-yourself handyman, he's very good at all that sort of stuff. He's actually fixed his up on a series of pulley rollers, so he can actually roll them up and secure them at the top of the greenhouse for when the shading's not needed, like through the winter and stuff. And just on a little pulley system, he can roll them down, and they're on a framework which sets them away from the glass, so there's airflow between that shade netting and the glass. That's really how it needs to be done. It needs to be on the outside of the glass. Putting it on the inside doesn't do much to stop heat. Provides the same shading, likewise, but doesn't stop the heat getting through the glass. And once it's in, you're stuck with it. You need ways of getting it out again. But yeah, he can't sing the praises high enough. He reckons it's good stuff. It's expensive, a lot more expensive than normal shade netting, but it does the job. He reckons he's dropped the temperature down considerably since he installed that. And it works even better if it's set, you know, a good distance from the glass, like 4 to 6 inches, because you get, you know, airflow, air currents underneath the shade netting, which stops the glass heating up so much and letting it through. So yeah, and he's got like an industrial fogger. Last year the garden party was at his house, and he demonstrated it, and he turned it on, and that volume of greenhouse turned into a cloud forest in less than 2 minutes. I've never seen a fogger chuck out that amount. In so, you know, huge big powerful fan driving it. And it was most impressive. And the beauty of a fogger, if you can get that volume of mist into your growing area, is that it's cool. It has a dramatic cooling effect on the air if in a volume like that. I mean, my foggers probably reduce the temperature a bit in here, but not enough. They're not powerful enough. You know, the mist comes out the top and it disperses so that you can't see it quite quickly. So although that moisture's gone into the air, it's not a huge volume, so the cooling effect would be less. Anyway, yeah, so difficult growing years for people. That's the way it is. Just looking round, you know, and thinking back to yesterday, I've got a fair bit in bloom. I don't know how it compares with loads of other people, because obviously I only saw one person's grow space. But talking to a lot of the other sort of more experienced and long-term growers, most of them said they're really short on blooming plants this summer. But I mean, I've got some that the Miltonia sunset doesn't seem to have been affected by the heat. These blooms have been out ages. There's another one opened up the back there. The third spike's coming up now. So 3 spikes on that. The Peter Comp has dropped 1 spike, but the second one's open. You know, so I mean, okay, on that shelf there's not a huge number of plants, but 2 are in bloom. And then all this lot down here, the only thing in bloom is the Miltoniopsis down there, and that's finally changed its colour. Literally over the last 2 days it's faded, it's lost its yellow and it's gone to a creamy white colour now. Now it did that a few days after I bought it. It was in bloom when I bought it, and then it did that after a couple of days, so I thought I'd bought a dud. I bought it as a yellow plant and it just isn't. But the yellow has lasted really well on that, so I'm now very pleased with the, you know, with the purchase. But in that set, that's the only one in bloom. There's not a Restrepia bloom in sight, not one. I've only got one Phalaenopsis with blooms, and that's the long-suffering Sweet Memory. That's down to 2, but there is a chance this spike may continue to extend. My Miltonia Queen Anne, blooms are going to last quite well on this, I believe, especially now, you know, the heat seems to have gone. And yeah, so these are going to open in a succession. I mean, there's still at least 2 more buds on this spike, and maybe another 1 on there. This one's trying to force its way into the world. It's a bit squashed up, but yeah. And I mean, in amongst this lot over here, not a bloom. It's a good job my little Pimguiculas keep blooming, because at least that's a little splash of colour here and there. They're doing quite well, actually. They don't seem to mind the heat. But I mean, over in here I've got some spikes. I mean, this is a Sherry Baby coming on, and this is my Oncidium varicosum, variety Rogersii. It's even got my name in it. But yeah, I mean, if you look at that whole set of shelves, oh, there's a little one of my little mounted Phalaenopsis has got another spike coming. I don't think that one's going to extend. I left it, but it's now producing another spike. And my named Phalaenopsis, the dinosaur one, I've forgotten what it is, something with Brontosaurus on the end, but I thought that was going to spike, but that's actually going to produce a new plant at the base. This one's always been prone to that. I mean, this plant's already been split in 2 once because it grew something like this. Now it's going to do it again. But if at the same time it produces roots and the mother plant's got roots, it can stay as a double plant. Chance of 2 spikes instead of 1. Always good. This lot, not a light. Nothing. No. There are some Cattleya sheaths that are, you know, probably going to produce buds down the line. And there's lots of new growths pushing on that will mature probably as we get into late autumn, winter time. So the Cattleyas should make an appearance down the line, but certainly not yet. Hibikis just hanging in there. Talking to a couple of others that have got this, certainly one guy, the guy who mainly grows Masdevallias, he got one at exactly the same time as I did, but he bought one of the ones in flower, and he reckoned he had flowers for about 6 months on his. So this is a good value for money dendrobium if you can get it. It's not a winter resting type, strictly speaking, although in the UK water would need to be reduced because it's going to slow right up. But for depth of colour and clustered flowers giving a good splash of a colour that's relatively unusual in the dendrobium world, I would suggest that this is really good value for money. I don't think it would ever be a difficult dendrobium to grow. Eventually it does become deciduous, but it looks like it's at least 2 years worth of leaves. I would suggest it's closer to a Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type than many others in the way that it grows. Pushes out strong new growths, push up reasonable sized canes that are leaved, and they should keep their leaves for some time. The blooms tend to come, well, it is said they come on the old leafless canes, but quite honestly, I think they'll push out blooms whenever and wherever. Obviously not on a brand new growth. That would need to mature first. But I've got several canes on here that haven't bloomed yet. So I've still got, you know, potential for blooming on the existing canes. So I've only actually got 1 strong new growth at the moment. But, yeah, so... no bulbophyllums in bloom now. The couple that I had have gone. In amongst the little ones, Comet King's just about hanging in there, and the Infundibulum cross, that's still looking nice. And the Spring Dreamer pollen young plant that probably shouldn't have bloomed, that's just going over now. But nonetheless, a little splash of colour, you know, not too bad. And in amongst the hanging stuff, not a light. There is 1 spike on 1 Tolumnia. That's it. And all the other dangly stuff up in the roof. Oh, I keep forgetting my Arangus. This is a little bonus, actually. This is 2 plants, and both plants pushed out 2 spikes. They will take a while before the blooms form. But looking at the shape of the spikes now, they're getting that zigzag look. And on each little zig or zag, whatever you want to call it, will be a bloom. They bud from quite near the base down to the tip. But the top plant's pushed out a third spike. So there's now 5 spikes on this. These, they. This is the highlight Arengus, one of the few. Most of them are tropical forest plants, so they're in evergreen forests, but this one is found in clearings and near the forest edge, and can often be found with some full sun on it during parts of the day. So this one needs a lot more light. And it's obviously getting enough if it's producing spikes like that. It produced 4 spikes last year that bloomed nicely. Typical Arengus type blooms, virtually white, hint of green, and highly fragrant after dark. The most fragrance is pushed out about an hour after darkness falls. So it's one of those, when it's in bloom, I have to remember to come out after it's dark. And talking of dark, I've just been checking on the old day lengths, and they are dramatically reducing now. You know, literally from the peak during the hot spell, nearly 16.5 hours, which none of these orchids would ever experience. These are tropical orchids, and in the tropics the day lengths don't change much. They sort of flick around between 11 and 13 hours, but all year round. That's the difference, yeah? So these are getting an awful lot more light during the UK summer than they would ever get where they would originally come from. I know there's a lot of hybrids in here, but obviously behind the hybrids are species, so they still have genetics back to their origins. Yeah, so they get an awful lot more light, but then it starts to drop off. And about the middle of October, I think it will be, from memory, we drop, in the UK, we drop down below that magic 11 hours. Yeah, as long as the daylight stays above 11 hours, these plants think they're at home, basically, so they grow and perform as normal. Once it starts dropping down below 11 hours, they're not getting sufficient light. So it doesn't matter how good the light is, it's not there for long enough. So it's around that time that I'll think about setting up the new grow light. And given its power, and the distance away from the plant, it's going to be difficult to work out where to put it to make good use of it. And the problem with all grow lights is, you know, I sort of think, right, I'll put a couple of cattleyas, you know. Well, that cattleya is nearly 18 inches tall to the leaf tip, you know, from the shelf. Well, how can I get a light a metre above that? I can't do it. So some plants physically won't be able to go below the grow light because they're too tall. They'll be too close to the light. Whereas others that are shorter in stature would probably be just right. And then some quite small plants on the same shelf might even be too far away. So what I've got to try and do is get myself a varied set of plants where the tops of the plants are around the same height. Now I can adjust the heights of plants by standing them on things, you know, to sort of move the smaller ones up a bit higher. But the idea is to get the tops of the plants in a nice even plane that is the right distance from the light. Now the lower sections of the plants wouldn't get as much light. That's natural. If you think about a plant growing in the wild, the top of the plant would always get the most light. And then the top of the plant would be shading some of the lower parts, so that's not bad. But what I don't want is to get them too close and start burning the leaves, because once you've done that, that's those leaves burnt. They don't suddenly get better the next day because they've been moved out of the light. So I need to take care. But yeah, I mean, my highest roof is over here. Yeah, so this is where I've got the most height between the roof and a shelf. Yeah, so this is probably the shelf I'm going to pick. and by sticking the light as close to the roof as I can by some sort of contrived mechanism, because that's a huge panel up there, so I can't put a hook in the middle of it and hang it down there, so it will probably have to be attached to some crisscross wires or something to get it as close to the roof as I can, and then set up a group of plants on this shelf that are all roughly the same height, either by the fact that that's how high they are, or by contrivance by standing them on upturned pots and various ways of doing it. And the idea with the grow light is to do nothing more than extend the day length. I don't plan on trying to grow the plants under the grow light, you know, actually having the light on like 12 hours a day or anything. Although the energy consumption of this grow light seems incredibly low for the amount of light it gives off, so that's a bonus. I think the one I've got is rated at 50 watts. Well, that's less than one of my circulating fans. Yeah, so it's quite a low power usage for the amount of light it gives off. But we will give it a go, and I'll probably use this area. The only thing I'll have to watch is the Vandas can't really go anywhere else. They live up in the roof, which in the winter is the brightest light I've got, even though the days are short. And if the light's going to be there and come out at a 90-degree angle, these lower leaves and roots are going to be burning. They'd be far too close. So I'll have to think about where it's all going to go. I could sort of think, right, my winter resting dendrobiums that need the brightest light possible, perhaps I could sort of get the light to point sideways and hit this hanging area here. But my resting dendrobiums all bloomed really well this spring, so they got enough light last winter. So I don't plan on changing anything for them. Shade netting comes off and they get hung where the sun's at a low angle in the winter, so it comes in through these side areas and then in through here and sets. It's so low in the sky. But the sun coming in the roof in the winter is next to nothing. It all comes in through the side windows, and I take all the shade netting off. So they're in sun when we get sun. They're in direct sun during the winter months, just literally December, January and part of February. And they all bloomed for me, with a couple of exceptions, not many. Mainly new plants. But so I don't plan on changing anything for those, and quite a few people are getting a little curious about the winter resting dendrobiums. It's too early, not thinking about that yet. Given the day lengths, it literally is the middle of October before some plants may start to slow up a bit, and that's the sort of time I'll start checking canes. Are canes still producing leaves? And you know, I'll see how I go from there. But it's all done by the weather, not the calendar. But middle of October is the time to start thinking. And if the plants are going to start slowing up, they won't need as much feed, so the feed can gradually come down. You know, they're using their feed when they're actively growing. So as they slow down and canes reach their terminal leaves, feed can drop off gradually. And then sort of probably middle of November-ish, the feed will have finished. But if we get a really late autumn with lots of good weather, all that'll have to change. If they're going to carry on growing, I'm going to keep them growing. Just because the calendars reach November, they don't work that way. So yeah. And then obviously once we get into the proper rest, when they have definitely stopped growing, then their water can be dramatically reduced, and by then the old shade netting will be off. And it worked well last year. I don't plan to change it. We'll see how we go. Yeah, so yeah, an unusual year for many people. And I got a few orchids on the dodgy list still. My poor old Harveyanum just don't seem to want to grow at the moment. It's buried in there somewhere. So this one with the not so good looking leaves, but there's still no sign of life at the base on that plant. I've still got no new growths. But then it's been hacked around a bit. You know, it got taken off its mount, it got remounted, then it got taken off that mount and put in a pot because it just seemed to be going downhill. So it's been disturbed a lot, having been in a static sort of environment for quite a few years, but something was going wrong with it. I still haven't put my finger on it. I still think the bark was breaking down behind the roots on the mount, and so it took the roots out, and without the roots the plant couldn't be supported properly. That's about the only logical thing. Difficult to prove emphatically, but you know, that's what I believe. And the only other thing I really do need to do some work on is this. This was a big, strapping, healthy plant, and to a degree it still is. It is a dendrobium that would become deciduous eventually. These are last year's new growths, and this year I've got some yellowing on the leaves. Now, whether that means they're going to turn deciduous or not, I don't know. But the two latest growths on that one around the other side, they're pushing on nice and strong. But I don't know, I mean, that could be a deficiency. It's such a strong grower, it's one of those that might suffer a bit from lack of nitrogen, literally, because it grows so fast and so strong. But then I've got other cane dendrobiums that are pushing canes out like that, and they're not showing any signs of stress or lack of anything. They're pushing on like good uns. You know, I mean, it's the only one. It's the only one that's doing that. It's an antelope type. But it's recently been repotted, because quite honestly it lived in the pot it came in for all of last year. I think I got it at the very beginning of last year. And I didn't repot it, so it stayed in the same pot. I've recently repotted it, and quite honestly, that media it was in was not, it didn't show signs of breaking down. It looked like pretty good bark to me, so I don't think it was the media. But anyway, it's been repotted now, so new roots and that have got clean, you know, fresh media to get into. But yeah, this yellowing and streaking on this plant is a little worrying. Shame, but I don't know what it is. You know, I mean, the trouble is with nutrient deficiencies, if you go into the individual nutrients and look at the pictures on the internet and stuff of what a deficiency in that one would look like, it's not as easy as that. Because if a plant's got a deficiency in one of the elements or a couple of the elements, it will affect the way the other elements work. Yeah? So, like nitrogen doesn't work on its own. It works with other stuff. So what might look like a nitrogen deficiency is in fact a deficiency elsewhere, making the nitrogen less efficient within the plant. It's not doing its job properly. You see what I mean? It gets very complicated, and to just look at a couple of pictures and say, yep, that's what I've got, it's not as easy as that. The art really is to know what you're putting in there, and if that all sounds good and balanced and okay, it's difficult to imagine why there's a deficiency. But some plants do grow an awful lot faster than others. Yeah, well, those that are putting on a rate of knots of growth will hit that nitrogen, and they'll need the backup that goes with it, calcium and various other things. They sort of work, quite a lot of those nutrients work together, and they don't work in isolation. They go in pairs or threes, and don't forget, we all tend to forget. We're worried about what feed we're using. Yeah, and is it right, and is it okay, and is it balanced, and has it got all the right bits in it? Yeah, well, let's put this little thought out there. If I took one of my orchids to one side and stopped feeding it all together, it wouldn't die. Why not? Because it would still photosynthesize, and that's enough to keep the plant alive for a pretty long time. It won't grow, but it won't die. Yeah? So we all tend to forget the nourishment that photosynthesis provides for the plants, and it's sufficient to just keep them ticking over. And as I said, they won't put on new growths or anything like that because they haven't got the backup of the nutrients that we talk about most of the time. But they're not just going to keel over and die because you've stopped feeding them. but they will stop growing. And a lot of orchids have got reserves in the plants. So if you stop feeding them, the effect wouldn't even show for a while, because they'll start using their backup stuff, you know, in the older pseudobulbs and the canes, the stored nutrients. So just because you stop feeding, they don't keel over, you know. They've got stuff stored up in there, plus the energy and the sugars and everything that's provided by photosynthesis. So it's a complex stuff. Saying that you know everything about what goes on inside a plant, from the photosynthesis elements, the transpiration, the respiration, the nutrient elements, the way that things move amongst the cells, and the semi-permeable membranes in the cells and what's going on. I don't want to know all that. My head would hurt. I need enough to just keep my orchids going. That'll do. But it is a very, very complex subject. You know, it's not something that an individual would normally profess to know it all about. You can know a good bit of it, and some may know an awful lot more than others. But I tend to stick probably around the middle range to what I need to know. I need to know what elements I'm feeding my orchids, and I need to know about photosynthesis, light levels, you know, all that sort of stuff. Purity of water, often underestimated. But that'll do for me. I don't want to get too flipping scientific and need a chemistry degree and goodness knows what else. I don't need all that. I'll manage. But yeah, that one is a problem. Just that one. Or in the dendrobiums anyway, just that one. And again, my Harveyanum that just seems to be not doing well for some reason. But overall, you have to sort of think, if you're going to go for a mixed and varied collection, some of them are in a near perfect world, or as near as you can get it, and some of them are not. Because they come from different environments. I mean, anything that comes from a montane forest is going to be difficult. And if you've seen pictures within montane forests, the fact that I can stand in my doorway and see the farthest corner of my grow room, this is not a montane forest, because it's just constant mist and fog and everything dripping wet. That's not the sort of environment most people would be able to create or want, yeah, because it wouldn't be that comfortable for the people. You also got pretty low temperatures involved in that sort of environment. So, you know, I like to be with my orchids, so I chose intermediate. And even though I've got some cool growers, and they're lurking around in here, there's probably a couple of what would be called warm growers. Well, with the warm growers, the only thing you really need to worry about is your minimum winter temperatures. Yeah, because it'll be higher than intermediate low winter temperatures. When I go down to 12 in the winter here, and thermostat and a heater stops it getting any lower than that. And that's 2 degrees lower than I used to have. And I think that is part of the reason my resting dendrobiums kicked in so well this spring. So they did get those lower temperatures. But I also believe it's not just that, it was also that extra bright light they had. That last winter was the first time I took all my shade netting off, and those resting dendrobiums performed. They really did. So anyway, I'm not sure my smoke thing has done its job. I can't say with the ants, because they still have a way of getting in. So even though the ones that were in here might have died, yeah, I mean, it's not like you can look round the floor for the bodies, but certainly the numbers since the old smoke. I've just found one on the Miltonia and one on that new growth. That's 2 ants in here. And having a little scan round, bearing in mind the movement attracts my eyes. So if they keep still, I might not see them, but they don't. They do tend to move around. And as soon as they move, they catch my eye. And so far today, 2, not 20. Whether it's done anything to the scale or not, I'm not so sure. In theory, it should have killed the crawler stages. It may not have killed the adults. It should have decked the mealybugs, but that's difficult to prove as well, because even if they've died, they're still there. So if I look at a cane that's still got some white bits at the end of it, I don't know whether they're dead or alive. But anyway, it was a way of treating the whole grow room overnight, every single plant in one go. The alternative is sprays or dunks. Somebody did remind me that the systemic function of insecticides, it has got to get in the plant. And there are quite a few types of plants, Cattleyas specifically, that have resistance on their leaves. The water tends to sit on the leaf and is not that easily absorbed. Some of the softer leaved things, like, you know, the Miltonias and the Oncidium types, probably absorb moisture an awful lot easier. Yeah? But certainly some plants, I have noticed a resistance. If the leaves get wet, they stay wet for quite a while, and other plants dry off quite quickly in the same environment. So they must be absorbing, you know, stuff easier, shall we say. So somebody did suggest that if you really want to get a systemic in a plant, get it in through the roots, as well as doing the plant, because systemic insecticides are also a contact killer. So by spraying your whole plant, topside, underside, canes, base of the plant, that's good. That's what you're supposed to do. But if they're a little resistant, like canes don't absorb stuff, they've even got stuff on them to protect them. So spraying these canes, I doubt if hardly anything is getting soaked in. Maybe some through the leaves. But somebody did remind me that, you know, if you mix up your solution in quite a large container and dunk the whole plant in there and leave it to soak for a bit, it will get taken in through the roots. Then it will get to the plant. I mean, if you think about that's how you add your nutrients, they've got to get to all parts of the plant. So by dunking, you might have a better result. And I may well try that. I've got some mix it up yourself, you know, concentrate of the Bravado stuff. So if I get a bucket, and even though that will be an expensive dunk to mix up sufficient for the whole pot to go in, not the whole plant, the whole pot, nonetheless it's completely reusable. You know, the roots on a plant will take in some, and take that one out, let it drain, put another one in. So I could go round the awkward ones as a sort of session and see how that works. My main concern is the scale. I just can't shift them. I mean, sort of, there's loads of different mixes and people have varying success. But it's still at individual plant level. That's the bit I'm trying to avoid, so I'll see how I go. Still working on it. I haven't got enough scale in here to call it an epidemic. My main concern would be my Tolumnias, because I lost quite a few plants due to scale. A few scale round the base of the Cattleyas is not the end of the world, although they will damage embryo eyes. They will go for those, and if they get in behind them, they'll probably destroy them and stop them ever growing. They do get on the base of the roots sometimes, near the base of the plant. They don't seem to harm those roots, not like they would a leaf. So a few scale around the base of a Cattleya, I don't worry too much. I, you know, deal with them, but if they come back again, it's not the end of the world. If I see them on the leaves, it's instant action. Because once they mark the leaves, which they will do, I just wonder if I could find my Prismatocarpa. Where's it buried? No, it's in the back there, so it's not going to be so easy. There's a leaf. You see the light patches on that? That was done by scale when that was a tiny little new growth with the leaves just coming out. Now those marks now stay on that leaf forever. Yeah? They're never going to go until that leaf drops and dies of old age. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's Chatty Sunday and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to have a lazy slow day in here today. I need to water my mounts. They didn't get done yesterday. But then, where's one that's heavy on the moss? That's still wet. Yeah, I mean, that's got media behind it and a lot of moss. That's a bulbophyllum. That's still wet. That doesn't need watering. But things that are effectively bare rooted, you know, it's been 2 days. This is its, didn't water yesterday, so that'll need watering. But Yeah, the ones with smaller amounts of moss are crispy. That one's still slightly damp. And, you know, I suspect things like this, yeah, that's damp. That'll be damp. So it'll be a selective watering today. I'm not going to do them all. But if I'm going to mix up a feed and do some, I'll probably do the holy clay pots as well. They've been 3 days now. It's difficult to find out if these are still wet. I mean, the pot takes an amount of the moisture out of the media, but down in the centre that could still have some dampness in it, but it won't hurt to give it a good water today. So lazy day, we'll see how we go. You know, if you've got adverse weather conditions for your orchids, you've just got to try and do what you can. And as I said, if you're growing in the home, you know, and you're getting prolonged sunny periods, just think about how close to your glass your plants are. Moving them back a little bit might do them the world of good. Or those that aren't quite getting enough light, move them a bit closer, obviously. If your indoor temperatures are starting to get high and your air's still, you know, make sure you get a little fan to just whiz around a bit. You know, we all know that although to us it's almost psychological, but if you're a bit hot, you fan your face with your hand and it feels cooler. Well, it isn't really, is it? It's the same air, but it's moving, and that effect has a cooling effect. So moving the air around the plants has a cooling effect. It will stop that heat building up on the leaves and move it around a bit. It all helps. And obviously the warmer it gets, the more you need to think about upping your humidity. That guy I was talking about with the fully automated thing with the industrial fogger, even at 35 degrees, he could maintain 80% humidity. I could never get anywhere near that. But it meant that even though the thermometer said 35 degrees, his plants weren't as warm as that because they had that cool mist falling on them. Yeah? So even though the air temperature up near the roof might have been 35, the plants weren't that hot. They had a cooling mist constantly on them and a hell of an airflow. You know, it's like walking into a storm going into his grow room when everything's fired up. But the plants do well in it, so, you know. Right, I'll leave it at that then. And anybody who doesn't like the long chatty videos won't still be here listening anyway. But I'd prefer you didn't complain about them. My videos are as they are. You know, moaning about them isn't going to change. If you're not too keen on the way my videos turn out, well, there's other channels. I don't worry about that sort of thing. My videos are as I make them. What I do like, though, is suggestions for more videos. That I do like. You know, a new idea for a new type of video goes down a storm. I love it. So, and I have got a few stocked up from suggestions from people. Thanks for doing this video. Could you do one about so-and-so? My spotlight on the Dendrobium senile seemed to go down quite well. So I may do a few more spotlight videos, you know, just to break it up, do something a bit different. But yeah, so enjoy what's left of your weekend. By the time I get to post this, there won't be much left. Well, not in the EU anyway. There might be a bit more left in the States, the time zone stuff. And yeah, see you next time. Bye for now.